Welcome to Redefining Engagement. I'm Francesca Dumar, Director of Audience Development and Strategy at Contribly. And in this show, I speak to leaders and innovators in the media industry so that we can bring tips, wisdom, ideas, and even some things to avoid so that we can all do more engagement better. So without further ado, let's move on to our next guest. Hi, Gerson. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to talking about engagement with you. How are you today?
Fine, thank you for having me, Francesca.
I'm really excited because I know that you do some amazing work in your newsroom. And so I'm really hoping that we can really delve deep into the idea of engagement. And I know that this is something that you've been working on for a very long time. So maybe I can go straight in with the quickest, easiest question. Would you mind introducing yourself for me, please? Tell me a bit about what you do.
I'm Gerson Veenstra. I work at EenVandaag, that's a Dutch background news show for the public broadcaster Tros. We reach about 800,000 to 1 million viewers daily. Also have a radio show, we do online. And I'm the manager of the online team and the interaction team that we have since 2 years now.
And I have heard a lot of the interaction team, and I think you do talk about it a lot in different places. Tell me a little bit about... No, never too much. Okay. In my opinion, when it comes to engagement and people interacting, it's never too much. Could you tell me a bit about the interaction team and what you do?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago in the summer of 22, I think, a few things came together. We were thinking about what kind of steps we could take into more audience engagement. Did some research. I had a student who did some research. And I had an idea about what if we started with just asking for questions. So just ask for questions people might have about any subject that we want to cover or any subject that's in the news maybe. So that's how we started, very small, like a small project. And what we soon learned is that we were surprised by not only the amount of questions we got, but also the kind of questions we got. They were mostly more basic than we thought the questions would be. And of course, sometimes people ask, what's in it for me? Or what's the effect on my life? And that's hard to answer. But mostly it's about what is it actually? What you're asking about? What does it mean? What's the background of the term you asked about? Like indecent behavior, as an example. I think we all have a kind of an idea of what it might be, but what it legally is, and the differences in sexual misbehaving or just bullying, or there are much differences in the term, and we never explain what it is when we use it. It's just a normal term we use in everyday coverage of news stories. And that's, I think, common for almost every question we ask. That always the questions that are sent in are basic questions about explain what it means, explain what it means when you use the term. And also for us, a lesson that we need to explain more. Sometimes we think, well, that's something our public really understands because we use it often. They see it in other media outlets, so we don't need to explain it. But I think sometimes we have to do a step back and explain what we're talking about and then explain what the news is. So that's how it started. Small, with just asking for questions coming in. But while we're doing that, we also thought, well, if this is the case, that we really don't understand what questions the audience has about different subjects, maybe there's more we don't know. So we had talks with the NPO, that's the umbrella organization for the Dutch public broadcasters. And they were also looking to find ways to have more engagement with the audience, maybe to gain trust, to have more impact with the stories that we're making. And the idea of an interaction team was born, especially to do a daily chat, one-on-one conversations, like journalistic web care is how I like to call it. And we got funded 7 editors for the interaction team who started in March 23. So that's a year and a half now.
Wow. That's such an interesting way of starting, because you basically had a team that was discovering assumptions in a sense.
Yeah.
And then that became a whole chat service within what you're doing. I really like that.
Yeah, we learned doing. I mean, that's all it was. We just tried something and learned doing, and discovered that there was more to it than we first thought of.
I think it's so easy to have fear to try something new, because you always think of all the bad things that can happen. And it sounds like your team had the culture to fail, in a sense, that you weren't scared of failure. It was actually, what's the worst that can happen kind of attitude.
Yeah, and for me personally, it was like going back to the start of social media all over. I don't know. Yeah, you remember, of course.
I'm not
You're
that old.
young. You're young, but not that young. No, though for us it was, I think, 2007 when in the Netherlands Hives came along, similar to Facebook. It was huge and popular in the Netherlands. And suddenly I had one-on-one contact with my listeners. Then I did a radio show here, and that changed a lot for me, because now I could just ask for what they were doing, or what they would like to hear about, or ask for subjects. And it worked really well. I mean, they followed me on social media. I still have Facebook friends from that time. I really don't know personally, but I know them because they are in my friends list, and I see what they do with the children and grandchildren and so on. But during the way social media changed, it became less social. I mean, it's nice to see on Instagram what everyone is doing, but it's not like you're in a conversation with them, or yeah, maybe sometimes in the DM, but not in the comments. So it's changed, and we took it as journalists for granted. Like Twitter, it was a source for us. We could instantly see what's happening around us. We got pictures from Twitter. We could find new stories. But during the time, it became less social, less normal people on the platforms that you really can do something with. And because we took it for granted, we also didn't try to find new ways to have the engagement that we had on the start of the social media platforms time. And this was for me a sort of going back to that time. I again felt this is what we missed the couple of years that we had in between, that we really are listening to what they're saying, that we really can have conversations with our audience. So it was not new, but it was a new way to do what we already had learned years ago.
That's fascinating. I guess you're talking through this audience engagement, and in my opinion, we confuse, and I think you kind of resonated with that. We confuse social media and the news, and everybody has a view of what audience engagement means. And I think we're sometimes tainted by what we experience on social media as that definition of audience engagement. I guess my first question properly to you on that is, what would you say audience engagement is?
I don't know if there's one definition that covers it all. I think audience engagement is, for me, it is a more a human-centric approach, I guess. So every story that you make, you can start with your own observations and your own questions about the story. But you can also ask yourself, what in this story resonates with my audience? How do they look at this subject? What questions would they have? How would this have impact on their lives? What what are you asking for me as a journalist to cover this? In what way? And audience engagement for me is really try to listen what they're saying, take the feedback seriously, do something with it, and give it back to them. And that circle, do that again and again and again, and you have you're making a start with bonding with your audience and knowing what your task as a journalist is more than just cover the news.
That's
Something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a feedback loop. There's listening.
Yeah.
There's asking yourself the right questions, making sure that you're doing this consistently. What are the aims of that audience engagement, in your opinion? And when you're creating that strategy, what are you trying to achieve at the end of it?
Oh, for us, it's trust.
Okay.
Above all, it's trust. Being trustworthy, being transparent, showing them we're easy to reach. You can ask us whatever you want. We answer you. We try to do our best to answer your questions in any way. But know that there's one URL you can use and you'll reach us and we'll answer. And there are real journalists on the other side. It's not a chatbot, it's real journalists. I think that's the most important thing, that they can reach us really easy. Yeah.
And so if you're aiming for trust, how do you measure that? Like, that's a
Yeah.
really tough one.
Yeah. An even tougher one is measuring impact. I found out. I'm still working on that. But trust also, of course, is hard to measure, and we don't have a big international research study to follow about trust of our brand. But we do every half year a survey among people we know that are following EenVandaag in any way. That's a group of 2,000, 2,500 of our audience. And we ask them these questions like, well, how much do you trust us, and what's important for you? And just a question so that we can check, well, is there any change in how they are thinking about us during the time that we're doing this interaction with the interaction team? And what we see is that trust in the numbers we see is growing from around 70 to 85, 86%. It's growing for the group that we ask for the trust question. So is trust really growing among everyone? I don't know, but this group, we see definitely that trust is growing. Yeah. And the answer we mostly get is you're reachable. I know that you're there. Even if I don't have the need for a question every day, I know I can ask the question if I want to.
That's actually a massive piece, isn't it? Because everyone doesn't necessarily realize that they can do that.
Yeah.
Or if they do, they don't really know what would happen. Whereas that transparency is such a huge part of what you're doing. What do you think, in all of the work that you've been doing, what do you think are the biggest hurdles or challenges in your experience? What's stopping brands from engaging better?
There are many reasons. The cost is one, I think. Doing things the way we do, yeah, it's 7 people, it's 7 editors. Yeah, if you don't have funding like we did, and we have it now for a couple of years, so that's nice. Yeah, of course, that can be a hurdle to find that money. I don't think you need to do it as big as we do. I think you can start smaller and just experience what you're getting out of it. That can be one. We talked about social media, and what you see on social media is a lot of hate comments. I think many newsrooms are afraid of hate comments and opening discussion lines with their audience, being attacked with all kinds of negative comments. We don't see that. I organized an extra training for the editors because I was afraid of this too. I thought I want them to be secure in what they do and don't be afraid. But we don't get a lot of hate comments. And I think the reason why is that there's another person on the other side of the line. So you're talking from person to person. And sometimes when people are overheated or really annoyed by something and are, um, well, they start a conversation like, "Whoa, I wanna." When they get a reaction, it's almost every time it's like, "Okay, right, wow, there's another person on the other side. I can talk with them. I can get an answer and maybe even get what I want out of this." So it's not a chatbot; it's a human, and I think that's a big plus for us. Third thing I think is that journalists are sometimes afraid of the impact of the feedback on their work. I mean,
Mm.
I'm a journalist myself, and I know how it feels like someone is interfering with your work or is trying to maybe influence you in a way that you don't want because you're the journalist, right?
Mm.
You make the decisions yourself, and you know what's good for a story, and you know what is needed. But now the audience sometimes gives another perspective or asks for another perspective, or sometimes asks a question that you also have. And what we heard from our journalists sometimes that they say, well, no, that's not a question I'm going to ask because that's a question I would ask, I would think of myself. For me, that's the perfect question because you already thought of it, and now you know the audience also wants to ask that question. So please ask it and let them know that the audience has this question. So you give them back that you are listening to them, and it's only better that they have the same questions as you have. I mean, yeah, that can be a hurdle for journalists. Um, are there more? Yeah, obvious.
I'd like to pick back up on one of the first things that you said when you were talking
Hmm.
about cost. Obviously, you said you're funded and you've got 7 journalists, and that is quite a lot. But then you said something about you don't need to start at this size. And I think that's if someone were starting out, where would you kind of suggest that they go, or what should they be focusing on in your opinion, now that you've done it at such an amazing scale?
Back in the day when social media was growing, my opinion was every journalist is responsible for their own feedback. And that sounds maybe a bit of big, like how can I follow everything that's being said about my story? But I think that's not only your responsibility. I think that's a kind of attitude you need to get better in making stories, but also in knowing what the outcome is, how your audience is engaging with your story and what they think about it, maybe what they're missing in the story you made, maybe follow-ups that you can make, maybe they experience something and you can use that for the next story. And
Mm.
if you kind of embed this in your way, in the way you do things, I think that can bring you a lot. And that's for me, it's always fun to see how people respond to what I do. And I'm never afraid or scared or think, oh wow, they don't like it. What did I do wrong? No, I just think, okay, that's the feedback to give. What can I do with it? Do I agree with it? Can I use it for a next story or for another story? Can I grow? Can I learn from it? And I'm never like shocked or anything by responses. But of course, that's something you maybe have to learn or maybe have to feel safe about. But when you have journalists doing the way that I described it, then you don't need an interaction team. Then they are the interaction team because they are the interaction team of their own story, and so we're covering all the stories with a different journalist, and they have their own maybe bond with the audience that's engaging with their stories.
That I love that basically you're saying everybody in the team is responsible for themselves. How, but then there's a cultural side to that of like, how can you, because not everybody is the same. Is there have you experienced or seen, or do you have any thoughts around how people promote or push that cultural change of way of seeing things?
it's difficult because we don't. This is not the only change we're having. I mean, we're also having a digital transformation where they maybe need to film for themselves. Don't have a cameraman with them. Do the editing themselves. Deliver for online, for radio. So I know it's a lot to ask from one person to do all the things that they are responsible for. But the biggest thing is, I think, just a mindset. Just be aware of that what you're doing is getting response, if it's in the pub or it's on social media or it's in the chat or in your mail. It's only good that people are talking about your stories and that they give feedback where you can learn from. Just keep talking about it and just discuss with each other what you are getting out of it and how you respond to certain reactions from your audience. I think it's not something you can do a course and then you're ready. It's, you have to just experience it, I think.
I'm on the same page as you. I think all the feedback should happen in the pub. And you'll definitely find me there, that is for sure. What about looking at like strategies and things that work really well? What strategies have proven for you that are most effective in engaging your audiences? What things are you doing that you think is really promoting that engagement?
Well, it's not about just listening. It's also about showing what you do with that. So we try to answer every question. And when we don't have the answer right away, we try to give it later. So ask for an expert or a journalist or an editor to give the answer. But also in the next step. So you get an answer, but when 3-4 people are asking the same question or missing the same perspective, then you know, well, maybe there's some work for us to do because this is what they're giving us back. They say to us, well, this is the perspective you gave us. Where's the other perspective? Or this is the speaker that you chose. Why didn't you choose another speaker? Or this speaker is not suitable because he has an own company and has an interest in this story or whatever. It's our job to show them what we do with it, not just by listening. Oh, okay, thank you. Next time we do the same speaker. No, just do something with it. Maybe explain better why we chose a certain speaker. Explain why they are the right speaker for this subject. Or when we do one broadcast with one perspective and another broadcast with another perspective, we can say, today we do this, tomorrow we have another perspective. So they know, no, it's not just this perspective, but this broadcast is just this perspective. And for the other perspectives, you have to watch the second day. Or there are things that we can do to give back what we get from the feedback. And I think that's the biggest thing for trust is not only listening, but also show that what you get from them, that you take it seriously and you do something with it.
How are you communicating all of this with your audience? You're obviously on the chat on the show itself, but for those who have got involved, if it comes later on and you're obviously holding on to that, how are you communicating with them?
Yeah, mostly in the chat. We have twice a broadcast. We say, well, have you questions about this subject? And sometimes the guest in the studio that is an expert joins the chat and gives answers for the audience, or the journalist that's in the studio gives the answer. So mostly in the chat, but we also have a weekly newsletter where we summarize what we do with all the feedback. We do articles about, well, we see this question a lot in the chat, so here's the answer. We still do the questions about a subject, so we do 5 questions about this subject and answers. And we also have an we call it a think tank. What's an English word? Focus group, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and
Oh,
we
I
have
much prefer it in Dutch. It sounds great.
think tank. Yeah, it's a think. I don't know what's a think. I know focus group. Um, and we had the third one last year. That was a younger group. So that was all about how to reach a younger audience. Um, and we have them over, talk with them and discuss with them the things we do and how we can do things better. But we are always looking for new ways to communicate. And yeah, sometimes it's just in the broadcast, sometimes it's, well, on other levels. Uh, but it's also not something that we're done with. It's not finished.
Mm.
We're working on it. It's a, it's it's a journey.
It is. I'd love to. You talked about this younger group, and you did a session with them. What kind of stuff did you get out of that? That's really interesting.
Uh, yeah, of course, it's something that most media outlets are looking at now, because how do we reach a group that's not coming to us? Um, well, I think that one thing we learned is that being approachable is also something a younger audience um, likes. And I think maybe that's also because they're used to it on social media. I
Mm.
mean, when they follow their idol or an influencer they like, they're used to comment and sometimes get a comment back. They're used to being able to ask questions. And the traditional media outlets, they can do, they can do maybe a comment on social media, but that's about it. And I think that being approachable and also being human, so not being a brand, but being a human, a journalist, like a person,
Mm.
that helps in the way they feel about the news they are seeing. So that's one. Um, the the difficulty for us, of course, is that they trust their algorithms.
Mm.
I mean, they don't trust us, but they trust that when we have something that's interesting for them, the algorithm picks it up and would show it them, to them. But
Huh.
that's for us. It's kind of difficult because we don't influence their algorithms, so we have to find ways to get in their algorithms and well, be there one way or the other.
That's fascinating. I haven't had anyone else necessarily talk about trusting the algorithm. I always,
Hmm.
and that's what you got out of that group. So they literally were
Sure.
saying, what the algorithm gives me, I trust that it's going to like what I like, and it's going to understand
Yeah.
me better than anyone else.
Or they search for longer videos on YouTube because they're very interested in one kind of subject,
Mm.
or they trust their algorithm and trust that when someone posts something they need to see or something that's really interesting, that the algorithm gives it to them. So that's also why they don't follow accounts anymore.
Mm.
They don't need to follow accounts because they trust their algorithm to push the info from the accounts in their timeline.
Wow.
Yeah,
And do you
tough
have
for us.
any? Yes, so difficult, like almost impossible.
Yeah.
We mentioned measurement, but we're not even talking about measurement. Impact is impossible to measure after that. Like,
Hmm.
how
Yeah.
do you even know?
Yeah.
And do you know, have you got any examples of successful initiatives that might have boosted audience engagement? Like maybe some specific ones for me that you really feel like have had an impact.
Yeah. But oh, this is difficult in English. We, we have something in the Netherlands that calls VIA. It's a law that helps people with disabilities in a work situation with social benefits. And what we discovered is that the way they are being observed is not going as should be. And we made a story about this. And then we aired it and we said, well, do you have questions about the subject? You can ask them in the chat. Big, big mistake. Because what happened was that a lot of people who experienced this were coming to the chat and asking us for help. That's what they did. I
Oh,
mean, of course, they came to the chat and I have this too. What can I do? This is what happened to me. So long stories of people who are really having problems and issues with this subject. And of course, with the few people we have in the chats to answer the questions, we couldn't help them in the way that they were expecting. So, in kind of how did we communicate this and how did we sort of raise a bar for expectations, an expectation level? That was a mistake, and we learned from this. So the next time we did a story about this, we made like a form with the URL, and we told them, well, if you have anything to share with us and you want to share your story, you can use this form, and then we'll get back to you. So we get 1,000 forms filled in from people who were all saying, well, this is what happened to me. So we had a huge database of people we can use for next stories. And now we could say, well, if you have any questions about the subject, not about your, then you can go to the chat. And we could always say, well, there's a form you can fill in and we'll look at it later and we'll combine all the stories that we're getting. So that had a huge impact. And I think we learned from it by just making a mistake. I mean, yeah, that's how you learn, right? If you don't try, you don't make mistakes and you don't learn.
100%. But it's really interesting that you've collected this group of people that you know are interested in that topic and
Yeah.
that you're following up that conversation. That's a fantastic example of that feedback loop kind of growing into something so much bigger. Do you think that your audience is consciously aware that they are interacting directly in a way with the editorial teams? Is this something that they're really they're not necessarily seeing it that way if they're asking for advice as well? What do you think they're seeing?
No, and we talked about this very recently because we were discussing ways to point out that there is a chat and people can use it in our broadcasts. And we have like a standard sentence we use. And I think we can do better by have a more various ways to do that. And we thought, well, we don't say there's an editor on the other side of the line. What we do say is something like our team. I think that's the phrase we use. Our team, do you have questions? Our team is ready to answer your questions, and here's the URL. Something like that. So we thought, what if we say our editors or our journalists and that's what we decided. So we're going to change it into our editors are on the other side so that people know, oh no, it's not just someone who is sitting there and Google it for me. No, it's the editors who know about, well, the journalistic choices that were made and know the background of the stories we're airing.
Fantastic. It's crazy. What I'm hearing from what you're saying is there's so much nuance in how you're asking the question, in the like every little word, people are really saying something completely different. And sometimes we probably take it so much for granted. Do you have any examples of moments that really surprised you? Anything that you really weren't expecting that to happen?
Well, now we kind of know our audience a little bit better than 2 years ago, I think. But there were many examples of days that we were completely surprised by the amount of response we get in the chat, and sometimes about subjects we didn't even air, like solar panels. It's a subject our audience is very, very engaged with.
Really?
If there's something happening with solar panels in the Netherlands, then people are coming to the chat, and I don't know what it is, but it's crazy. Pension is also a subject that people are really, really talking about and interested in. And of course, our editors are young and not busy with their pension and always having trouble with answering difficult questions about pension. But when we hear something about, well, there's a subject about pension, then alarm bells are ringing, and then we're ready for the chat that is coming. But also, we had elections here in the Netherlands months ago, but the elections, the result was a shift to the right, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And most people were kind of surprised of the outcome of the voting. But when we thought back about the chats we had in the months before, the weeks before the elections, we could almost pinpoint the way that people were more like aggressive or more dissatisfied about the politics that they were experiencing until then. So if we would have been more, if we have a better umbrella view, maybe, I don't know, and I think then that we could have foreseen that this was the outcome. But that was in retrospect. I mean, it's not something that we were aware of when this happens. But when we look back, we think, well, yeah, we kind of saw it in the chat the last few weeks that there was something changing. Yeah.
So you're saying it's the journalists or your team probably didn't have that view, but actually, because they were looking at it from the perspective of not believing that was going to happen, and yet the proof was there, they were just blind to it.
Exact. Yeah. And me as well. I mean, I'm no saint. I experienced the same. But it's funny that when you change the perspective, you can see other things. And it's maybe something we should do more often also, in general.
That actually brings a really good change of topic to tech. Because sometimes it is the human that is the one that is putting this perspective on it. Is there a role with tech, in your opinion, like AI, or even data analytics, that is, what's the role that you see it playing in our audience engagement efforts?
Well, what I'm afraid of, the ChatGPT has search now. What I'm afraid of is that more and more people will use tools like ChatGPT to consume the news and take for granted what they see as the answer from the chatbot they're using. So if they use our content to give them an answer, that would be enough for them. So they would not click through to our website and see what we made. Now the answer the chatbot is giving is enough for them. I'm afraid of that because not only is the influence that we have on the answer is limited, so we don't know what they are choosing to give for an answer, but also they don't get the whole picture from us, that is, and we have our own journalistic values, ethics, that we in every story like to express and make sure that it's okay that what we're publishing. But when they're missing it, I don't have a clue what they see and how this is affecting them. So in that way, tech could be a big threat for us as media outlets. And I think it's an extra reason to take audience engagement seriously, because when you create a bond with your audience and they know, okay, this is the answer I'm getting from chatbot, but if I have real questions and I want real answers, I can ask a journalist who was behind this story and did their research and know what decisions were made when this story was published. So now is the time to really invest in that bonding with your audience and trust, because, well, if you can find the answer anywhere without going to the source, maybe loyalty is the only reason for people to go to you.
That's such a fantastic response. And also, I don't think ChatGPT has a brand, does it, in a sense? we're not necessarily trusting it. Well, I don't know. Maybe there are young people out there that completely trust it to the infinity. But that interaction is what creates that loyalty. It is fascinating. But that's your fear. Do you have any excitement for tech, or is it very much like, okay, this really
No,
could
no,
ruin us?
no. I'm a nerd and I'm an early adapter, so I use it a lot. And I think there are big chances. For audience engagement, I don't know. I think there are kind of the standard answers that you could automate and make a chatbot for. But I don't think that we would make that step very soon, because people are very glad that we don't have a chatbot and we're human.
Mm.
But I think, well, it's getting better, and there are a lot of questions that are easy to answer, and I think a chatbot could do really well.
Maybe stepping away from tech. Maybe it's maybe a bit about the future of audience engagement. Where do you see audience engagement heading in the next 3 to 5 years? What do you see? What can you imagine, or what would you like to see happen?
Well, I see a change, and everywhere I come, I see young journalists also who are very aware of the need for a better understanding of the audience. That the journalism is more than just covering the news and be the watchdog, but also be the guide dog. So I see that change is coming, and people are really they see it as a chance to be better journalists. Last week I was at an event, and someone told me after, I was questioning myself about, am I still a journalist if I'm not always looking for the biggest news or always try to be the first with big news, but when I'm interested in people and wanting to tell the story that people have, so more the human-centric approach that we talked about.
Mm.
And I think she was the kind of relief that when she heard, well, of course it's also journalism to listen to your audience. That's who you're doing it for. So when you're not listening to them, how do you know what stories they would like and need? And so I see a change, and I think that change is happening everywhere in journalism, in newsrooms, and it takes time. So see what internet did for newsrooms. It took like 10, 15 years before some newspapers thought, well, maybe we should do something with online. So I think also this is also something it's going to happen slowly, but you'll see it everywhere. And I think that's a good thing, that we're aware of also groups that we're not reaching right now, that there are ways to reach them, to get in touch with them, lean forward, be approachable.
I love that sentence. Watchdog versus guide dog.
Yeah, it's not from me. It's from the Daily Maverick. They use it as their, for every story they ask themselves, okay, watchdog, guide dog, how do these two, how can we use them in these stories? Yeah, I love it too. It's a good metaphor.
It really is. It really
Yeah.
is. We've mentioned in passing some of the skills that we need as journalists to be able to engage better. And there is such an expectation on them. You've mentioned, getting their own feedback, video. In the future, what can you imagine the most important skills being, or which skills do you think young people should be focusing on to be able to do this better?
Young people are sometimes afraid to pick up the phone.
True.
Yeah, it's true. So I think the most important thing for them is to learn how to be a good listener. That's the most important thing that it was funny. I was interviewed by a student after the event last week, and I think it's one of his first interviews. And he asked me when it's ready, so how did I do? I loved that question. I was really amazed. I think, wow, that's it's so good that you asked this question because um, you allow me to give you feedback and you can learn from it maybe. And or you can think, well, what he's saying, I don't care. But at least you're giving me the chance to give you feedback. And I had good feedback for him. Like what we all did when we were young journalists is ask 3-4 questions in one. So the interviewee had no idea what question to pick to answer. So that was something he did. So I gave him the feedback to just ask one question, let it be a really good question, and then see further how the answer goes. And but I love the way that he was showing me that he wanted feedback. Most journalists don't want feedback; they want to go to the next story. So yeah, there's hope, I think.
I love that. That's such a great moment. That's so
Yeah.
good. And then I guess one of my biggest, well, I'm guessing I already know the answer, but I'm not going to answer for you. What impact has increased audience engagement had on your organization's bottom line and brand loyalty? And have you measured that impact? How do you know?
Measuring impact is something you'd really like and something that's almost impossible. I think, because what is impact for one? Is it that they are asking questions about them in the parliament, or is it that a law is changing? Is it that someone is talking about the subject with someone else? Is it like someone's opinion is changing? You can measure, if you could define impact on many ways. So that's one, but then also finding out if that happens is difficult. We ask after a chat, we ask, well, did this chat do anything with you? Has it changed your opinion? Are you going to share the story? Has it answered your question? So we try to measure some impact by asking it after a chat, but still putting a number, an impact number on it. We haven't figured that out. But we see the impact in the newsroom. We see that journalists are more open for subjects that were pointed out by the audience, but also questions about perspectives or questions about speakers, or they're much more aware of the things they do, that they get responses, and that we learn from what we get from the audience. So I think that's the biggest impact in how the journalistic approach is changing in the newsroom.
That's huge.
That's huge.
It is huge. Like all of the different editorial teams that we work with, that's one of the hardest starting points. So the fact that that interaction is creating that is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and they see a young team of 7 journalists sitting. I mean, it's not something you can ignore. No, they're there, and they're loud sometimes, and they speak up, and they make content of their own. So, and they are answering the questions that are being asked about your story. So you need them. You need to trust them also. So, yeah, it's a good thing.
That's great. I absolutely love that. One last question for you. What is an engagement hack that you could offer someone that's starting out on their engagement journey? If they had to do one thing, what would you tell them to do?
Start small and experiment. That's my way. And small can be as small as you want to. It's like asking one question, see what response you get. Try it on different platforms, see what kind of audience you have on the different platforms, how they appreciate what you're doing. Just try and experience, observe. Yeah, you don't need to have a plan of 200 pages and hours of work before you start. Just start and see what happens.
Such a great hack. Well, we should be doing it anyway. Don't live our life in fear.
No. Why should you?
Thank you so much for your time. I've absolutely loved this conversation. And
Me too.
hopefully all of these examples are useful to others as well. And they go on and do some amazing engagements from there on. Love it.
Yeah, and any tips and any feedback is welcome. I mean, we're learning still. So anyone who sees or hears this and thinks, well, I have a great idea, share it, please.
Yes, please, please, please do. Definitely. Thank you so much. I will speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.